I was 58 when I finally went under the knife. The doctors had warned me that the surgery would be tough. Whether it was the hip replacement or the lingering complications of the tumor they'd removed, I knew recovery wouldn't be easy. But what gave me peace was this. I was going home. To my bed. To my son. To a place where I thought love would hold me while I healed. The house hadn't changed much since I raised him there. The faded curtains still carried the scent of old jasmine oils, and the living room clock still ticked a little too loudly. But now, instead of a toddler running through the hallway with scraped knees, it was a grown man, my son, 28, tall, well-built, confident, promising me that everything would be fine, that he'd handle it all. "Don't worry, Ma," he said that morning while settling my hospital bag beside the bed. "I've got this. Just rest." I nodded, trying to suppress the guilt already creeping in. I had spent most of my life giving. To him, to the house, to my work. Asking for help didn't come naturally. But I was exhausted. I couldn't stand for long, couldn't cook, couldn't even get up without assistance. For once, I needed someone to lean on. As I lay down on the firm mattress, pillows carefully arranged behind my back, I let out a sigh. Not of pain, but of trust. Trust that the boy I raised with late-night feedings, school tuition I could barely afford, and birthday cakes made from scratch would now step in for just a few weeks. That he'd see the woman who once carried the world for him, now needed a hand to carry a spoon. I never thought I'd have to beg for basic kindness. Not from him. But this was just the beginning. And I had no idea that the real pain was still waiting for me. Not in the stitches, not in the scars, but in the silence that followed. It didn't take long for the promise to fade. Just 2 days after I returned home, the warmth in my son's voice had cooled, and the attentiveness he showed at the hospital vanished like mist in sunlight. On the first morning, I waited, stomach grumbling, for him to bring the breakfast he'd said he'd make. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Then, nothing. Hours passed. My water glass sat empty, my medication untouched. I finally called out, "Peter, can you please bring me some water?" No reply. The second time I called, the door opened slowly. He walked in with his phone still in hand, eyes not even meeting mine. "You could have just texted," he muttered, placing the glass on the bedside table without a word more. That day, I skipped 2 doses of pain medication. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't walk without help, and asking felt like a crime. Each request was met with a sigh or an eye roll, and each time, I swallowed my pride a little more, until it began to choke me. On the third night, I heard him talking on the phone with someone in the living room. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the walls in this house are thin. His voice cut through the silence. "Bro, it's not even that serious. She's acting like she's on her deathbed or something. Honestly, it's dramatic. I mean, she just had surgery, not a heart transplant." The laughter on the other end made my ears burn. I lay still in my bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly, mocking my helplessness. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I didn't feel like his mother. I didn't feel like someone being cared for. I felt like an inconvenience, an item on his to-do list he resented checking off. Suddenly, I whispered to myself, I wasn't his mother recovering. I was a burden. The boy I once carried through fevers and heartbreaks now saw me as weight. And the worst part, he wasn't even hiding it anymore. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind that usually made me want to curl up with tea and a soft blanket. But I couldn't even sit up without pain shooting through my side. The stitches still pulled. My limbs still felt heavy. I had managed the whole morning without asking for anything, just waiting quietly in my bed, hoping maybe he'd come in and check on me like he used to, like he promised he would. But the door never opened. By late afternoon, my lips were dry, and hunger gnawed at me quietly. I told myself to wait a little longer. Maybe he was busy. But finally, I gathered the courage to raise my voice. "Son," I called gently, not wanting to sound demanding. "Could you please bring me something to eat? I haven't eaten since morning." A pause, then heavy footsteps. Then, the door slammed open. He stood there, arms crossed, face twisted in frustration. "We are not your waiters, okay? You've been home for days now. You can at least try to help yourself instead of expecting to be waited on all the time. I didn't even register the words at first. The tone hit harder than the sentence. My breath caught in my throat. Waiters, the word echoed around the room, bouncing off the walls, slamming into every soft memory I had of him. Every birthday cake I baked, every fever I stayed up all night to soothe, every time I walked to work in the rain just so he could have a packed lunch at school. And now, I was too much. I blinked slowly, but didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. I just nodded, as if I understood, though my heart cracked with a sound no one could hear. He left the room without another word. The silence that followed was even louder. I lay there, still and stunned, but not from pain this time. From betrayal. Not the kind that leaves bruises, but the kind that rewrites your memories, makes you question every I love you that once felt real. In that moment, I realized, love does not guarantee compassion. And just because you give someone your whole life, doesn't mean they'll give you water when you're thirsty. That night, as I lay curled under the thin blanket, hunger settling beside me like an unwelcome guest, my mind drifted, not forward, but back. Back to the days when his cries pierced the silence of the night. He had terrible asthma as a child. I still remember the sound of his breath wheezing in his tiny chest. There were nights I didn't sleep at all, sitting beside him with a cold cloth, a humidifier humming, praying he would keep breathing. He doesn't remember those nights. He doesn't remember how I ran to 3 different pharmacies one monsoon evening, soaked to the bone, just to find an inhaler after his ran out. He doesn't remember how I skipped meals so he could eat better, how I smiled through my own migraines so he wouldn't worry, or how I stitched his school uniforms by hand when we couldn't afford new ones. I worked 2 jobs when he was in college, one at the community center in the morning, one at the hospital reception desk at night. My legs used to swell from standing too long, but I never once told him. I wanted him to study, to grow, to never feel the weight I carried. I still remember the look on his face when he got his scholarship letter. How he hugged me tight and said, "You did this, Ma." Back then, I believed we'd always be close. That love built from sacrifice would last forever. But now, I lie here, aching, unseen, and he doesn't even notice when I skip meals. Doesn't care if I take my medication or not. He walks past me as if I'm furniture. Not the woman who taught him how to walk. Not the woman who clapped when he learned to tie his shoes. He was once my heartbeat. Now, he couldn't even warm soup. Now, he couldn't even warm soup. The betrayal didn't come from a stranger. That's the part that breaks you. It came from someone I raised with my own hands. Someone who used to call me his hero. Now, I was just an inconvenience taking up space in his home. No, not his home. Mine. The one I paid off, brick by brick. The one I made warm enough for a child to grow up dreaming. And now, the very same child could barely speak to me without sighing. It was on the 6th day. I remember because the pain had settled into something dull but constant, like a knock that never stopped. I hadn't left the bed in over a day. I'd run out of fresh water. The lunch plate from the day before still sat untouched on the dresser, cold and congealed. My throat felt dry. My back ached, and even the silence had started to hum like a warning. That afternoon, a knock echoed through the front door. It startled me, not because it was loud, but because it had been so long since anyone had come for me. After a few moments, I heard the click of the door and footsteps approaching. My bedroom door creaked open, and there she was, Nazarene, our next-door neighbor for almost 20 years. Her eyes widened when she saw me lying there, pale and sunken into the bed, pillows deflated, face drawn. "Oh my God," she whispered, rushing over. "You haven't been taken to the hospital again, have you?" I managed a weak smile. "No, just recovering." Her gaze scanned the room, the unwashed plates, the untouched medication blister packs, the water glass tipped on its side. She looked at me like she was trying to piece together a crime scene. Gently, she sat down on the edge of the bed and placed her warm hand over mine. "You're all alone?" she asked softly. And then came the question I hadn't heard from anyone, not even once in all these days. "Where is your son?" I looked at her for a moment too long. My lips parted, but no words came out. There was too much shame in the truth, and too much history in the silence. So I just gave a short, embarrassed smile. One of those smiles women wear when their stories are too ugly to say aloud. The truth was uglier than pity, because telling her that my son, the same boy she'd seen grow up next door, the one who used to call her auntie with a grin and carry her groceries, had now become someone who couldn't be bothered to help me recover, would have broken something in the room that no kindness could glue back. Nazarene didn't push. She just nodded quietly and stood up. "I'll bring you some soup," she said gently, "and fresh water." That simple gesture, kindness without question, did something to me. For the first time in days, I felt seen, not as a patient, not as a burden, but as a human being who deserved care. And that woke something in me that had been asleep too long. That evening, after Nazarene left a bowl of warm lentil soup by my side and gently closed the door, I stared at the steam rising from it like it was a miracle. Something about her kindness, her simple, wordless understanding, lit a small fire in me. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness. It was something quieter, something more alive. That night, I pulled out the old leather-bound notebook tucked in my bedside drawer, the one I used to jot recipes in when he was young. The first page was still stained with a bit of turmeric. But this time, I wasn't writing how to make chicken stew. I wrote down the sentence he shouted at me. "We are not your waiters." Just seeing it written in my own handwriting made it feel heavier. Realer. I didn't stop there. I wrote about the glass of water I had to beg for, the meals I didn't eat, the time I overheard him laughing on the phone. I wrote the moments exactly as they happened, not for anyone else, but for myself, because I needed to remember, not to hold a grudge, but to understand how far I'd fallen. Each night, I added to the journal. One page, then another. My words became clearer, my thoughts sharper. It wasn't just a record of his neglect. It was a map of my awakening. Some pages were tear-streaked, some angry. Others were quiet reflections, questions I never asked out loud. When did he stop seeing me as a person? Was love really this fragile? If I disappeared tomorrow, would he even notice? And in between those hard questions, I also started to write about myself. Not as a mother, not as a patient, but as a woman, as me. I wrote about the things I used to love before my life revolved around being someone's everything. I wrote about the things I wanted to do once I could stand again. Simple dreams, like walking to the market by myself, or sitting on the porch during sunset with tea and peace. Day by day, something inside me began to heal. Not the surgical wound that was still sore, but the bruises on my soul. They started to fade with every word. I wasn't writing revenge. I was writing rebirth. This journal, this small, quiet book, had become the mirror I needed. Not to look back at the woman they saw, but to rediscover the woman I truly was. 2 weeks after the surgery, I had a follow-up appointment scheduled. I hadn't wanted to go, not because of pain, but because I dreaded the car ride with my son. He'd already made it clear that any effort on his part was a favor, not a duty. That morning, he grumbled the entire way, complained about traffic, about how I should have postponed the visit, about how he hadn't had breakfast. I stayed quiet, looking out the window, my journal tucked beside me in my bag like a secret companion. At the clinic, I shuffled slowly behind him. He didn't offer an arm, didn't even wait at the door, just walked ahead like I was some distant relative tagging along. When we were finally called in, I sat down on the padded table, exhaling softly. The nurse took my vitals, nodded briefly, then left. A few minutes later, Dr. Kaleem walked in, my surgeon, a kind man in his 60s with silver-rimmed glasses and eyes that had seen too much. He studied my chart, then looked up at me with concern. You've lost weight," he said. "You look weaker than I expected at this stage." I nodded faintly. "I've been trying." He examined the incision site, gently lifting the bandage. His brow furrowed. "This should have been cleaned more regularly," he muttered. My son leaned back in the chair with a sigh. "She's always dramatic, doctor. She won't move. She won't even try. Keeps asking for things every hour. It's exhausting." I didn't speak. I just looked down at my hands. The doctor turned slowly and faced him. There was no smile on his face now. No kindness, just clarity. She just had major surgery. She shouldn't have to ask every hour, he said, voice calm but firm. She's recovering from a procedure that requires consistent care, balanced meals, hygiene, and support. My son shrugged. You don't know her. She acts like she's dying. The doctor didn't blink. No, I don't know her, he said. Then, softer, but dead serious. But I know what neglect looks like. The room went still, and for the first time since I'd come home from the hospital, someone said what I couldn't. I blinked back tears, not from pain, but from the relief of being seen, from the weight of having someone finally speak the truth out loud, in front of him. It didn't fix everything, but it cracked something open. A door, perhaps, to the idea that I didn't deserve to suffer in silence. The day after the doctor's words echoed through that small examination room, I sat on the edge of my bed, journal in hand, and made a decision. A quiet one. No fireworks, no angry monologue, just a gentle acknowledgement that love does not always come from blood. And sometimes, it must be protected from it. That evening, while my son was out with friends, yes, friends, laughing at rooftop cafes while I lay sore and forgotten at home, I made a call. Not to a therapist, not to a friend, to a lawyer. Mr. Kamal had handled my husband's estate years ago. A man of few words, but sharp eyes. I told him calmly what I needed. I want to update my will, I said, and I want it done before the weekend. There was a pause, then a gentle, of course. Shall I come to you? He arrived the next morning. We sat at the dining table, the same one where my son now ate meals without offering me a plate. I opened my journal, flipped through pages filled with moments that no child should ever let a mother write, and slid it across to him. I don't want him to receive a single thing, I said. We reviewed the document. The house, the savings, the pension, the small land parcel up north, all of it previously assigned to my son. But now, I removed his name without hesitation. Instead, I wrote in the name of Aliyah, my sister's daughter, a young woman who, despite living in another city, had called me every week since my surgery, who once sent me a package with herbal teas and a note that read, if I were closer, I'd be there in person. She never asked for anything, but she gave something no one else did. Care. He always assumed I had no one else, that I was alone, that no matter how he treated me, he would inherit the rewards of the very life he had neglected. He was wrong. By the end of the afternoon, the papers were signed, witnessed, filed, and just like that, my silence had become power. I didn't confront him. I didn't announce my decision with dramatic flair. I simply smiled when he walked past me later that night, phone in hand, laughing with someone who clearly mattered more than his mother. He had no idea the very foundation beneath his feet had shifted, and when he would one day open that envelope, he wouldn't just lose money. He'd lose the illusion that I'd always belonged to him. It wasn't a dramatic escape. No bags flung over my shoulder. No stormy arguments or slammed doors. It was, in many ways, the gentlest thing I'd ever done for myself. I had found a quiet assisted living apartment on the edge of town. A small place, not fancy, but clean, peaceful, and warm. They had a garden where hibiscus flowers bloomed, and the staff greeted me with soft voices and hot tea. It was funded entirely by my savings. Not much, but enough to cover what I needed now, dignity. I spent a week quietly planning. Packed only what belonged to me, the journal, some clothes, my old recipe box, and a framed photo of my mother, who always told me, don't wait until the world remembers your worth. Walk out when it forgets. And the world I'd built for my son, it had long forgotten me. I left on a Wednesday morning. The sunlight filtered gently through the curtains as I stood one last time in the house I'd once made a home. My steps were slow, but steady. The driver helped me into the car without question. No fanfare, no farewell. On the kitchen counter, I left a single folded note beside the kettle, the one he never once used to make me tea. I needed love. You gave me chores. That was it. No blame, no plea for understanding. Just the truth. I imagine he came home that evening, dropped his keys on the table, expecting me to call out his name like always. expecting to smell dinner in the air or hear the faint sound of the TV humming in my room. But they would have been only silence. Then, perhaps, the realization that I was gone, that I had not just disappeared, but chosen to leave, chosen to stop asking, chosen to stop hoping. And for a man who had always believed his mother would never go, never protest, never rise, it must have felt like the walls had moved. I didn't leave to punish him. I left to protect myself. And as the car pulled away from that house, brick by brick built with my sacrifices, I didn't look back. Because sometimes the softest exit is the loudest thing a woman ever says. It had been nearly 5 months since I left. Seasons had shifted. Pain had dulled. And I had slowly, quietly rebuilt something I hadn't realized I'd lost. Myself. My days were peaceful now. Mornings spent in the garden. Afternoons reading in the sunlit corner of the common room. Evenings sipping warm tea with other women who wore the same soft strength in their eyes. My journal sat full beside my bed, but I no longer wrote in it as often. The words had served their purpose. I had stitched my soul back together one entry at a time. And then, one quiet evening, my phone rang. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. My son. For a moment, I simply stared at it. A part of me almost didn't answer. But something, not curiosity, not even forgiveness, just a quiet courage, made me press the green button. His voice was already broken. "Ma," he breathed. Silence. Then, a sharp, stuttering breath. I lost my job. They let me go 2 weeks ago. The rent's behind. I tried getting help, but..." He choked on the words. "I don't know what to do." Still, I said nothing. I let him speak. I listened not as a mother, but as a woman who had once begged that same voice for water and dignity. Then came the words that trembled most. "Mom, I need you. Please come back. Just for a while. Just until I get back on my feet." I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I remembered it all. The cold plates, the raised voice, the hunger, the journal, the soup I never got, the silence that screamed louder than any insult. Then I opened my eyes and said calmly, "Sorry, I'm not your caretaker." There was a pause, the kind that falls like glass shattering between two people. He didn't know what to say. Maybe he thought I would cry. Maybe he thought I'd rush in and fix everything like I always did. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because I wasn't the same woman he left behind. I was no longer the invisible nurse, the unthanked cook, the background shadow. I was a person. And this time, I chose myself. Life didn't end when I left my house. It began. At first, I thought peace would be quiet. Solitary. Just a soft room, a garden, and silence. But slowly, it bloomed into something warmer, fuller, and completely unexpected. My niece, Aliyah, the one I had written into my will, began visiting often. She'd bring fruit, new books, sometimes just herself. She never asked for anything. She listened, and unlike so many others, she never looked past me. She looked into me, with understanding, with care. Nazreen, my neighbor from before, called every Friday. Once, she brought over a small container of my favorite pickle. "You used to make it better," she laughed. That laughter, kind, without mockery, was something I hadn't realized I missed. At the community center nearby, I joined a small women's group. We were all different, in age, in story, but we had one thing in common. We'd all been dismissed somewhere in life. Forgotten, overlooked. But now, in that room filled with quiet strength, we'll listen to each other like no one else ever had. One afternoon, the center hosted a storytelling session. I hesitated, but something told me to bring my journal. The one filled with pain, with truth, with every moment I once couldn't say aloud. I read a single page, then another. By the third, I looked up and saw eyes wet with empathy, heads nodding, women gripping each other's hands. Afterwards, one of them stood up and whispered, "Thank you." I thought it was just me. It wasn't just me, and that changed everything. I started hosting a weekly gathering, Tea and Truth, we called it. We shared not just stories, but pieces of ourselves we thought no one cared about. In that small circle, I found something I had never truly experienced. Not in my own home, not even with my own son. Belonging. No one asked me to serve. No one rolled their eyes when I spoke. No one called me dramatic. They just listened, held space. Some families are not made by blood, but by kindness. And in this newfound family, I wasn't someone's servant or someone's forgotten mother. I was whole. I was loved. And for the first time in a long, long while, I loved myself too. The sun streams through the lace curtains of my new room, casting golden patterns across the floor. There's a breeze coming through the window, gentle and soft, carrying the scent of the hibiscus flowers I now tend every morning. The world feels slower here, not because time has changed, but because I no longer rush to be everything for everyone. There's no shouting, no slammed doors, no footsteps retreating down a hallway when I call out in pain. Just calm, just breath, just me. I sit in my favorite chair, wrapped in the shawl Aaliyah gave me, the one embroidered with small blue flowers. In my lap lies the journal. Its pages, once filled with tears, now rest like quiet proof of all I survived. I flip to the last page. The handwriting here is more steady than the ones at the beginning. Bolder, wiser. It reads, asterisk asterisk, I used to believe love was sacrifice. That being a mother meant erasing yourself so someone else could be whole. That silence was noble. That exhaustion meant success. I used to think if I gave more, they'd love more. But now I believe love is also choosing yourself. Not as a last resort, but as a beginning. Asterisk asterisk. I close the journal gently. I don't need to write anymore. Because this chapter of my life no longer needs to be documented in pain. It lives in peace now. It lives in the small things. The morning walks with Aaliyah, the laughter during our tea and truth gatherings, the quiet prayers I whisper in gratitude before bed. Not for what was lost, but for what I found. People sometimes ask me if I've spoken to my son since, if I've forgiven him, if I miss him, and I always answer truthfully, I wish him well. But I no longer carry him like a wound. He may have shouted. He may have called me dramatic, may have looked through me like I was nothing more than a task to endure. But he also did something he never meant to. He set me free. Free from the illusion that love must come from family. Free from the lie that enduring cruelty is a virtue. Free from the belief that needing care is weakness. He thought I would stay. Instead, I stood. He may have shouted, but in my silence, I found everything I needed.